Capitol Report is a production of Senate Media Services.
With the deepening housing crisis, key lawmakers talk about ways to increase affordable housing and improve access to home ownership. Plus, whether to increase taxes on the richest Minnesotans prompts a spirited debate. Stay tuned for this week's Capitol Report. Welcome to this week's program. I'm Shannon Loehrke. The Senate recently passed a $115 million funding package to improve the pathway to home ownership, increase affordable housing, and provide an off-ramp for the eviction moratorium. Senator Rich Draheim, chair of the Senate Housing Committee, joined me to talk about the housing omnibus bill. Issues surrounding home ownership and home affordability have really moved to the forefront over the last couple years. Anecdotally, on the floor, you mentioned members' children and grandchildren struggling to find that first home. Housing used to be a part of another committee. Now it stands alone, and more money than, as is usual, $115 million would go towards housing in your funding package. How did we get so far behind on housing?
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the good question. We haven't focused on the end goal, in my opinion. And the end goal, if we really want to help people, is home ownership. Owning a home is cheaper than rent in most cases, and that should be our goal. Is what can we do to get people educated, get them on a career path job, and then a pathway to home ownership. And I've been a broken record about all the benefits about home ownership in the 5 years I've been up here in St. Paul, and I think it's a great equalizer.
You believe, as you just said, that homeownership should be the end goal of housing policy. This funding package is a move in that direction. How does this package make progress toward home ownership?
Well, we do some various things. Over the last 5 years, we've put a focus on home ownership, different types, from senior housing to manufactured housing and workforce housing. And, I think we focus on the end goal on that, and then we focus on some new programs with our state money to focus on that end goal instead of just more apartments. And when we build apartments, we build very expensive apartments that cost 2 or 3 plus more than the open market would cost to build. And then we might do a infrastructure, we might do a tax TIF, and then we finance the program, and then we give them a tax credit on the backside, and then we just go and pay the rent for people. So I think there are different things we can be doing for housing, and rental's still important. So I'm not a guy that says we shouldn't do any rental. We still do rental. We still need to do a lot of rental. But I think we also need to focus on the other end.
Well, and this bill does have $1.6 million in a workforce home ownership program. And there's also some money for home ownership education. How would that work?
So we have the agency works with nonprofits throughout the state to help educate people on, what is the pathway to a home ownership. And I think some of us, or a lot of us, take it for granted because we grew up in a home, and other people haven't. They haven't had that generational home ownership. I think my parents' first house was $14,000. Interest rates were through the roof, but it was very affordable for a used house. And today you're looking at probably $240 for the average home throughout the whole state for an older home. So we need to get people so they understand the benefits of home ownership. And I think that what we call HECAT or the education piece of what our state agency does is very important.
Now, you also mentioned on the floor that Minnesota has one of the worst home ownership gaps in the country between white people and African Americans in particular, but also people of color. How can Minnesota begin to close this gap, especially when there's a shortage of starter homes?
It's going to be tough, and I think part of it is we need to focus on that, and that's what we're trying to do. And as a state overall, We're in the bottom of the pack, not the worst. But when we break apart Minneapolis is considered to be the worst in the whole country. And that's sad, because that means there's a lot of families that don't have the opportunity to better themselves. And you look at the net worth of a family that rents versus a family that owns a home, it's night and day difference. And, so if we really want to help people, we should help them get into some kind of home ownership, and not just single family homes, but other forms also.
One measure in the bill that seems to have caused a little bit of controversy revolves around developments that have aesthetic mandates that exceed existing zoning requirements. You said that you hope to encourage cities to do the right thing. Is there an attitude of not in my backyard that is stymieing efforts to increase affordable rentals and housing?
Yes, I think there's a really big pushback for NIMBY, is what we call it. And that's too bad. And all we're trying to do is encourage the cities to have a section of their town where they have more affordable housing options, and not trying to push any mandates on them that they have to do X, Y, Z or so much per population or block or anything like that. But they need to do the right thing. And if they don't do the right thing, they're just going to come to us and ask for funding for more of these apartment buildings that, like I said, cost 2, 3, 4 times as much as a normal housing or apartment building would cost. As far as the aesthetics, we already have it in statute that cities aren't supposed to require anything above and beyond the building code. So if it isn't in the building code, so if it doesn't, building code is supposed to be about safety and energy, the look of a house doesn't really apply. Now, as a homeowner or as a developer, I can decide what I want to put on the appearance of my house. And that's what it should be. It should be up from the individual. I don't want to be told what color I have to paint my house, or I have to put brick on the front. So that's what we're trying to get through.
This package provides an off-ramp to the eviction moratorium that was put in place at the beginning of the pandemic. What are some of the key points that landlords and renters who are behind on their rent need to know?
Go to Rent Help MN. We have a great website set up, the state does, and we've been very fortunate to get a lot of federal funding to help people that are behind. We can argue, should we do it or not? We have the money. We have the program set up, and we really can't get people to move on until they get squared. My goal is to get everybody who wants to the opportunity to get a home ownership. But if you own a whole bunch of back rent, it's gonna be pretty hard for you to move on. So if you have any friends or family that are behind, or if you're behind, go to that Rent Help MN and apply. Work with your landlord and your property manager to get caught up. That off-ramp bill we worked really hard on, and bipartisan support, and it had some language in there that was very tough for the other side of the aisle to vote for, and that was restricting future executive orders for this chapter law that has to do with rental. But we still got a super majority vote off of the floor to move forward. So I think we're in a real good position moving in to have that conversation with the House. But I think that's up to 42 states have already done something. 42 states. So we're one of the outliers. And it's unfortunate, but I get the feeling that the state agency doesn't want to have an off-ramp. And they've been dragging their feet on this. And it's something that we need to get done and get that off-ramp passed in both bodies.
And just quickly before we go, there is a ban in the bill on municipalities from enacting rent control. Why is that?
Rent control is probably the most studied aspect of housing. And it's something that came up when I was in college as an example of what not to do. And that was a while ago. And it's been studied by economists from every type of government all over the world. And It's absolutely the worst thing you can do if you're trying to encourage more housing units. And we have a 50,000 housing unit deficit in Minnesota. So 50,000 housing units. That's why rent is so high. That's part of the reason housing is so high. Right now we have lumber prices and some other factors going into that. But we need more units. That's the goal, more units.
Senator Rich Draheim, I'm going to have to stop you right there, but we can pick this up another time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
During floor debate on the housing bill, lawmakers grappled with some of the challenges facing the state.
The challenge presented is not everyone enjoys home ownership, and we have a tremendous gap in Minnesota. And I heard Senator Draheim talk about that being a reality, that we have a real problem here in Minnesota when you think in terms of the gaps. For an example, when you compare blacks to whites, you know, only 1/4 well, 3/4 of white families in the Twin Cities own their homes, and only about 1/4 of black families own their home. And when you think about that roughly 77% number, 60% of Asians own their home, while 50% Hispanic folks own their home, and only 49% of natives own their home. So that gap that you talked about, Senator Draheim, is real. Not to mention the fact that this area, Minneapolis or Minnesota, has a long history where racial covenants made it hard for blacks to own homes in white communities.
This bill would encourage the development of multifamily homes on lots that are designated as single family, and then it also limits a city's ability in Section 8 to require certain aesthetics as part of the development. When you have a fast-growing district, look, we all want affordable housing, but the fact of the matter is that the main costs that are driving up housing right now are the 3 L's: lumber, labor, and land. And we know that the Met Council is restricting the expansion of the MUSA line, driving up land costs. We've got a shortage of lumber coming from Canada, and we've seen labor costs just simply on the demand of work that needs to be done and is being requested on the rise. This will have very little impact on affordability, but what it will do is it will potentially hurt the property values of the people who live in those towns or also in those neighborhoods.
Could you do your job today if your car was your home? Could you come to work and be successful in this job if you did not have stable housing? Kids cannot learn. Treatment for addiction and substance abuse is not successful. Finding and keeping employment is much more difficult when you do not have stable housing.
I too have learned a tremendous amount in this committee, and it's almost humbling. And the one thing I have learned from Senator Draheim is that housing is the great equalizer, along with a good education and broadband. But there's many things that we should be very grateful about with this bill. Instead of saying that the glass is half empty, the glass is half full.
The pandemic has only deepened Minnesota's housing crisis, with the state now facing a shortage of 50,000 housing units. Senator Kari Dziedzic is the ranking DFL member of the Senate Housing Committee, and I spoke with her about what's needed to improve access to affordable housing. During the Senate floor debate on the omnibus housing budget bill, you said this isn't a bad bill, but it is not meeting the moment. What did you mean?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me to come and chat about housing. It's a very I'm very passionate about it. Being on the Housing and Tax Committee, we have housing discussions in both of those committees. What I meant about it's not meeting the moment is the status quo is not working. From the pandemic to the death of Mr. Floyd, to the many people experiencing homelessness in our parks last summer, to the conviction of Mr. Chauvin, it has been a tumultuous year. The pandemic made people reevaluate and they want some changes. The pandemic showed the importance of housing. How do you stay home if you don't have a home? So I think people are ready for some changes. They want to see us do something. People want action. And unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of investments in this bill that can actually help people go home.
The bill provides a phase out for the eviction moratorium that was put in place because of the pandemic. What is important for people who are behind on their rent to know?
They should really talk to their landlords. There are federal dollars that are coming to the state of Minnesota for help. And so we need landlords and tenants to work together. They should go to renthelpmn.org, literally RENTHELPMN.org. And there's a list of their documents that they'll need to apply. There's a link to apply. The money is coming here. It's an extraordinary time with an extraordinary amount of money that can help us. And so we don't want people evicted. We want people to get that money and to stay in their homes.
The fact that Minnesota is 50,000 housing units short was mentioned several times on the Senate floor, and it's just a huge number. Like I thought about it for a minute. 50,000, that is really a big number. Is it even possible to catch up?
We don't have an option. Failure is not an option. Housing is important to individuals and our economy, so we have to keep trying and we have to keep moving forward.
And ideas for how we might be able to get in front of that number?
I think the bill had some policy changes that hopefully might help. And then, I mean, it truly takes an investment. We need to actually build more housing. And we also are going to need to figure out a way to help people stay in their homes. So it is a combination. And quite frankly, it's going to take a lot of creativity, and we're going to have to come together and truly think outside the box because we cannot fail.
And so, but kicking the can down the road is just not an option at this point.
Correct. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. We need to take action, and we need to take action now.
The Senate's housing budget package includes a provision that would ban municipalities from enacting rent control. What is your view on rent control?
Well, many cities are looking at ways to stabilize rent. It is an economic development issue. We've heard from cities all across the state saying, you know, we need housing. We need more affordable housing. We have jobs, but we can't find people can come and work for here, but they don't have a place to live. And so people need to, it's going to take a lot of effort, but I think communities want to find a way to stabilize housing. My city, Minneapolis, is looking at ways to stabilize housing. I think it's a pretty hot topic right now. And if they're going to put it on as a vote in November, and, I've had conversations about them as what's the best way to help and who are they helping? And I think as Minneapolis and other cities look at how they stabilize housing, I think they are going to have to look at, again, who are they trying to help? We don't want to further displace other people. We don't want to gentrify some areas. And so, again, it's going to take a lot of creativity, but we're going to have to make sure that we don't have unintentional consequences.
On the Senate floor, Senator Lindsey Port, pointed out that housing is the only public service that you can qualify for but not get assistance. Why is that?
Federal dollars have not kept up. So people can qualify for a public housing voucher, but that doesn't help if there's no openings. So last June of 2019, I think it was, the years kind of merged together there, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the Met Council, so three of our largest housing redevelopment authorities and public housing authorities, they had opened up their wait list. Minneapolis has not opened up the wait list for about 10 years. There were 45,000 applicants. So of those applicants in Minneapolis, about 72% were female-headed households, 50% were households of children, 38% had a disability. The average income was $31,000. And so you think about that, that's 35% of the area median income in Minneapolis, in the metropolitan area. There's just the lack of affordable housing at that level. We need some deeply affordable housing at 30%. And so, if we just don't have the housing units, if you can get a voucher, but you have no place to go, that's not helpful. So I have a bill, Bring It Home Minnesota, that would help people in that 30% range, help them pay for about 30% of their housing. And so it's kind of a substitute or a supplement to the federal bill. But, bottom line is the feds need to put more money, and then we need to figure out if we aren't building that 30% area, if we aren't building housing for that 30% area median income, then, maybe we need to provide assistance for more people to live in some of those units that cost more than 30% for people making 30% area median income.
You represent an area of Minneapolis, and on the Senate floor, Senator Draheim said that the discrepancies in home ownership between white people and Black African Americans is the largest in the nation in Minneapolis. Cities like Asheville, North Carolina, and Evanston, Illinois, are looking at reparations programs that would provide down payment assistance to African Americans. What are your thoughts on something like that?
So a lot of the cities and a lot of the public house, a lot of the housing authorities across the state right now do have some of that first-time home buyer assistance. Minnesota Housing Finance has programs that help first-time home buyers in closing costs. The gap between white ownership of housing and people of color in Minneapolis and in Minnesota is it's just not acceptable. There are a lot of historical reasons for that. And I think we have made some changes in the past where there were covenants on the houses before saying people of color, Black people, could not purchase that home. And so we have allowed those to be removed. We've done a few things to break down some of those barriers, but affordability is still a barrier, and then helping people with those closing costs, because it is getting people in your home, and then it helps build wealth, which is, I think, another thing we need. But, I think those first-time home buyer programs, the regular traditional banking programs aren't necessarily working for a number of people, but I think the Minnesota Housing Finance Program, they help about 35% more people of color than those traditional programs. So I think we are doing some things, but again, we need more money. And I don't want to say money is always the answer, but sometimes it is about just getting people more money to help with that first time home buyers costs, those closing costs. If you're paying $1,000 for an apartment and you can get an equivalent home for less than $1,000, it just makes sense to move people to that home. But sometimes, it's the closing cost, it's the additional money down for insurance and all that. So if we can help people get that closing costs, we can help maybe move some more people into actually more affordable homes.
Yeah, down payment, just coming up with the down payment alone can be quite a challenge. So, and I've heard from both Republicans and DFLers, home ownership builds wealth, it improves education, it improves health, it improves overall the welfare of people. So you've laid it out, but just to kind of close on this note, what are the biggest obstacles to progress?
I think affordability is key. If you look at the home ownership issue, it is how do you get those closing costs? People might be able to pay month to month, but they just need that help getting that 10 or 20% down payment. And so I think, how do we best reach people where they're at, to explain it to people and to help them find what they're comfortable with. And then right now there's actually, I think there are, for home ownership, there's about 50% less homes on the market right now than there were a year ago. So if there were 7,000 this past March, there were 17,000 in March 2020. And so that shortage is increasing the cost. And so that is, affordability is one of the issues. And so again, helping people find that home is good. And then if you look at when they've looked at people experiencing homelessness, 56% said they couldn't find an affordable place to live. And so I think affordability for getting people into affordable apartments and affordability for getting people that help to get them into a home that they can afford, they just need that extra help to get in that home. I think those are some big barriers that it will take an investment.
Senator Kari Dziedzic, I want to thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
As part of the omnibus tax bill, senators had a spirited debate over the governor's proposal to create a fifth income tax bracket.
It would ask a little bit more for the top end, the wealthiest people in our state. Something that I think a lot of them have been willing to pay. 10 years ago or so, I remember both the St. Paul and Minneapolis papers had full-page ads. A lot of people saying, we think you should tax us more. We ought to pay our fair share.
We're just not meeting the need on higher education. Our economy depends on an educated workforce. And instead, we have steadily reduced funding for Minnesota State and the University of Minnesota. You know, we have a provision in law that's become rather aspirational that the state would pay 2/3 of the cost of higher education so that students and their families are only paying 1/3. And over the years, that has reversed.
This amendment is increasing tax burdens on Minnesotans at a time when we have substantial reserves, a surplus, and billions coming from the feds. Minnesota has one of the most progressive income taxes in our nation. This would make it even more so.
There is a need for additional resources, and this is from students, from parents, from locally elected school board members, and others. The Republican target of $152 million, yes, it's additional money, but when you factored inflation, it will be cuts.
I think we can say we've raised enough taxes when people who are hungry have enough to eat. I think we can say we've raised enough taxes when our young people can go to college in Minnesota and not incur lifelong debt. I think we can say we have raised enough taxes when people who are disabled don't have to spend down into poverty just to keep their health care.
We're 46th highest, and we've been about at that rating, I think, ever since I've been in the Senate. But so we've got Connecticut, New York, California, New Jersey ahead of us. Maybe there's some real good places to live. I don't know. Maybe we ought to take a look at those states and see how much better they are. Mr. President, members, I think we're taxed high enough.
What we are doing by continuing to raise taxes in this state is we're going to continue to export wealth.
How small do you want to make our border cities along the Dakota borders? Just how small? Because that's the reality. When the taxes become so out of line, so unfair in Minnesota,
I think it's a mistake because we don't bother to tell people that they're already paying way more than what most people think would be a fair share.
Join us again next week as we delve into more topics affecting Minnesotans. I'm Shannon Loehrke, and on behalf of all of us at Senate Media Services, thanks for watching.